Hello everyone and welcome to Tech with Robert, the Get Started with T-SQL course. In this lecture we're going to learn how to work with strings. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give a thumbs up on the video if you like what I do. That really helps me to know what I do well and what you guys want me to improve or focus more on in the future lectures. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So every column and every value in T-SQL has something that's called a data type. So that is sort of that describes what type of data that the data that the value represents. So for example, if I write here, if I run the number 10 like this, so this is an integer, it's a number. So for example, if I was to do addition, I would not be able to store this value 10 here in a string. They'll specify like this and then say plus 10 like this. This would not work as a mathematical operation. So if I write here, for example, select 10 plus 10 as a string over here, we see that it's not going to perform the actual addition. We expect it to be 10 plus 20, 10 is 20, but as you can see here, since this is a string, it just concatenates the string values. So this is regarded as text here because we have that in the brackets here. And so when we do when we try to add these two together, they're just going to take this and apply it at the end of this string over here. So we will get 10, 10. If we wrote it like this instead, that we say 10 plus 10, without the single quotes, we would get the number 20 here. And that is because when you write it like this as a number, this data type is of integer, and when you have a number and you try to add another number to it, you can perform mathematical operations, but you cannot do it with this, since it's just going to concatenate the two strings together because these values are regarded as strings. So if we take a close look at strings, in the previous lectures up until this lecture, we've mainly just worked with string columns. So we have something called, if we just do the previous query that we have been working with, then we say we want the customer key, first name and the last name from the customer. We see that we have string characters here. So this is regarded as text, and so there are a couple of different data types for strings. I'm not going to cover all of them here, but I will leave a link in the description down below so you can read more about them if you want to. I'm going to walk through the most commonly used ones. So we have, the first one is something called a varchar. Okay, so this is specifying that the data type of that column that you're working with is going to be a varchar. It's going to be a string. And then you can have parentheses here to specify how many characters you want that string value to contain. So I could write, for example, 50 like this. So I'm going to declare a variable. Don't worry if you don't understand the syntax here. This is just to demonstrate some things here. Feel free to follow along if you want to, but don't get scared if you have never worked with variables and so on before. It's just for demo purposes. So we could create a variable here called my text, for example, and we set it to varchar 50, and we set that's going to be equal to Robert, for example, and then we select the my text variable. So if we run this, we see that we have assigned this my text variable, and this, just think of it as a column because it applies to the columns as well. It's just that we've created a variable, but this could be like any column here or any column. So we've said that, okay, we have this my text column here, or variable, and we set it to varchar 50. So we're allocating 50 characters that's going to be able to be stored in this variable over here. So we said that, okay, it's going to take 50 characters, but what if I just wrote that varchar 3? I'm just allocating 3 characters to this, and but I still type the value Robert. If I now run this query, we will see that we will only get Rob over here. And that is because we have only allocated 3 characters in the varchar to this column, so we can only store a maximum of 3 characters. And so when you have different, for example, if you're working with names, addresses, phone numbers, etc., cities, countries, and all that, you usually use varchar, and you could do, for example, if you know that, okay, it's not going to be so much data, in each row, you could use 50. That's a pretty standard one. Or you could use varchar max. So what varchar max does is that all of these, they store from 1 until 8,000 characters. Okay, so what that's going to do is you're still going to allocate a lot of memory here, because even though I'm not using all of the characters here, it's still going to allocate the space here. So it's not a good idea if you know that, for example, you have names and addresses and stuff. You could simply just do 50. So that is the varchar. You also have a char, which is you specify the number of characters. So you can use that whenever you know beforehand how many characters there will be in a column. So for example, if we would have, if we would have a column called, for example, gender, and we only have, for example, M or S to represent male or female, we could have char 1, for example. We could set that to M. And so now when we select gender here, we're going to select value M. So this here, the reason why it's a better idea in this case, because we could, for example, we could have the same thing here. We could use varchar 50 and still just store the value M here for married, and we do the same thing here with char 1 for married. The difference here is that we're still going to allocate 50 characters this variable, but we're only using 1, but we will still take up the place for 50. So we don't know. So in this case, we know that in this column we can only have S or M, for example. So we know that whatever value we get into this column, we will only have either S or M. We will always have 1 value. So then it's better to specify that, okay, this column here, we're going to have 1 value, so either M or S. And so what happens if I write male now? I use this. It's the same thing as before. We will only get the value M because we've told SQL Server that we only want to allocate 1 space here, 1 character to this column here. So everything that comes after the first one is not going to get stored because we specify that we only need 1 here. So this works the same way here if we change it to S. Another data type that we have is text, and text stores large amounts of text, like for example documents, articles and stuff like that. So when you have very large text column, text data, like as I mentioned, articles or documents, you could use the text data type. And so this stores it can store approximately up to 2 gigabytes of data. So it would not make any sense to use text here just to store Robert, because we're allocating so much space for something that we're not going to use. So that's only used for large documents or articles of data, large text values. So now that we had a varchar and char, we also have nvarchar and nchar. So what those are is the nvarchar and nchar stores Unicode characters. To go into detail what the Unicode characters are is a little bit out of the scope. I will leave another link in the description if you want to read more about what Unicode characters are. Just know that that's the difference when you put the n here. Instead of varchar, you put n varchar. That is to a Unicode varchar, to store Unicode values. I've noticed when working with systems, getting data from different systems, storing in tables, and then, storing that data, doing data transformation, and, moving data to different tables and stuff. It's usually people use the n varchar because you could store more types of characters compared to just using varchar and char like this. So you will see that a lot, because, for example, when you specify tables, you see that we're going to create table and we're going to have name, and they're going to use n varchar, for example, n varchar 50 like this, or char 4, for example, or char 1, or n char. So that is it for there are a couple of more of text, string, character data types, but as I mentioned earlier, I will leave a link down below if you want to read more about those. These are the most commonly used one that I work with. So we also have something called string functions. So there are a lot of times where you're going to have to sort of manipulate the data. So sort of convert data and like replace data or add data to existing data in a column, or you want to search or like extract data. For example, if you have a field and you get customer's email address, and maybe you need a specific column for that's called the email domain, and then you want everything from the @ sign and then to the end of the string, you want to store that in a specific column, or you need to reverse the data, you need to make all of the characters uppercase or lowercase, or you just want to, for example, you have a name, and then you have a space, and then you have a lot of gibberish after that, and you want to extract all of the data up until the space and then delete everything after that, for example. So there's a lot of string operations that you would need to do, and so learning these functions is a very good thing to do. So you can also find, I'm not going to cover all of the string functions, but I'm going to cover sort of the most commonly used ones that in my experience I use a lot. But you can see a list of all of the functions here. So if you click on programmability here and you go down to functions, you see here that you have something called string functions. So if you open that folder, you see here's a list of all of these string functions that you can use on text. So I'm going to go through a couple of them. So if we just delete this for now. If I type declare and I want my varchar, for example, I'm going to say my varchar 50, and I'm going to have the value Robert. So then I could select. So I select my varchar over here. Oh, sorry, like this. If I select my varchar like this, you see I just get the string Robert. And the first function that we're going to talk about is the left. So what this does is you specify, by the way, you can also open the functions here and look at the parameters. So you get an explanation of what they do. So here it says returns the leftmost specified number of characters from a expression. So let's say that we wanted a new column where we only took the first 3 letters of this column. So we wanted a column where it just would be Rob instead of the whole Robert. But what we can do then is we type left, and then open and close in parentheses, and we say we want to use that column here, that variable we have here, and we only want the 3 first letters. So we could name it as _left, for example. If I now run that query, you will see that we only get Rob because we said that we only want the 3 characters starting from the left. And the same thing, we can do the same thing but with right. So if we take my varchar here and we say we only want the last 2, for example, from the right, we would only get RT, for example, here. Another very useful string function is the char index. And what the char index does is you're going to provide a column, and then you're going to specify what value you want to search for. And what it's going to return is the index position of where that value is inside of your string. So if I say, for example, I want to search for the letter B in my varchar over here, and I just say char index, for example, you see here that the letter B is at position 3 in this column or variable over here. So we see that we have ROP, and it finds the letter B at the index 3, so it's on the 3rd position in that string. And we could also write it differently, like you say B, we can say for example E, and we have my, or by the way, it's another function instead. We have another function, it's replace. So for example, we can replace, if we have something in a string, and if we have a string, a piece of text that we want to replace with something else, we could use the replace function. So here, the same thing as before, we are specifying that we want to use this variable or column here, and then we need to specify what we're searching for in order to then later specify what we want to replace that with. So in this case, we could say, for example, we're going to search for the letter B, and we're going to replace that with the letter D, for example. So it's going to look in that string here, and it's going to, we said that look inside this string here, this variable here or column, look for the value B and replace that with the value D. So here, for example, it found that now it says Robert instead of Robert because it replaced the letter B with D. You can also replace that, let me just copy it instead. You can also replace it, for example, with an empty string. So you just do like that. That is sort of like, okay, I want to find the letter B and just replace it with nothing. So just simply take it away. And now you see we have Robert instead of either Robert or Robert. And as we can imagine, we can also replace that with a empty string, space, for example. If we just put a space here, I also have row and then a space at. We can also replicate a piece of string, a piece of text inside of a string. So we could write, for example, that we want to replicate. We take my varchar here, and we want to replicate the value inside there 3 times. So what happens now is we see that we took this value Robert and we replicated it 3 times. And we could also, for example, say that we write my varchar here, and we say that we want to add a space here. We could use that function to replicate that over here. So we could say we want to replicate it 2 times, for example, as replicate 2. So now if we run it and see this, we see that we've replicated the whole text here. So we had Robert, the text Robert with the space, we replicated that 2 times now. Other function, in some scenarios you want to make every text, every letter uppercase or lowercase. So there are 2 functions for that as well. So you could say lower, and you say my varchar. Then you see that every letter here is going to be in lowercase, and it's the exact same thing if you just run upper. Then every letter here is going to be in uppercase. And you can also sort of nest these functions together. So say, for example, you have another function, it's called reverse. If you want to reverse the whole string, you could just simply say reverse. And what happens here is now it takes that string here and it sort of just reversed it. So now it says Trebor instead of Robert. But we see here for some, let's say for some reason that, oh, we don't like it because we have Trebor and then we have an uppercase R here, for example. Then we could, if we copy this line of code here, we can, we can sort of use these functions inside of an already existing function. So we could use, it's called nested functions here. So outside of this here, we have reversed the value here, and we can come outside, and then once it reversed, we can apply the lower function on that reversed value. So if we run this now, we see that we get the exact same result, but the letter R is in lowercase here. Another very useful function that I use a lot is the substring. And let me just create another variable here. Go to workshop 50. I'm going to say that T-SQL is awesome. Like this. If I now select the my var over here, and I can say we have a substring. So we say substring, and so this is, we are retrieving a subset of the string. So for example, we have up here, we have T-SQL is awesome, but if we only wanted to, in this string here, we only wanted to extract the word awesome, for example, we wanted to search for a string here to sort of, just get the subset of the value. We could use the substring function, and that is a very, very useful function that I use quite a lot. And the parameters for that is that you specify what variable or column you want to use that on. You say my var, and then the next parameter here is you need to specify where to start. So where in the text do you want to start your search from or extraction? So we can say here, for example, we see the T here is at position 1, so we can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, for example. So we want to start at the position 10, and we want to say, so we have here, we want that as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, for example. So, and we just write 7. So let's just see what this does here. You see now we only get the letter, the text awesome in this string. So we specify that we want to extract the substring of the text inside of this column here, and we want to apply it on that column here. We want to start at position 10, and from that position we want to take the 7 characters after the A in this case, and then we get the value awesome over here. Another very important function to understand are the length and sort of how we can combine char index that we looked up over here. Because let's say, for example, I'm just going to create a, as I said earlier, don't worry if you don't understand this now, just follow along and try to understand here what I want to highlight. So we could say, for example, we select robert.robert@gmail.com, for example, then we select mike.mike@gmail.com, for example, and we specify this as email, like this. So if we now select email from email, notice that whenever you run a select statement from a query like this, you need to include the whole here. So let's say that we wanted to extract, we need a new column where we have the customer or the user's email address, and we wanted to extract what type of domain they have. So what we could do is, for example, we could sit here and we could count, or we could say, okay, I want the email domain here, so Okay, we're going to use the substring. I'm going to use the email column. And okay, so if I wanted the Gmail from this one, for example, I could say, okay, I have Robert, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so we start, okay, we say 15, and I want G, we go 5, for example. So this will work for Robert's email, but look what happens here is we have hard coded here that we want to start at the position 15 and get the 5 letters that comes afterwards. And so, but it doesn't work for this one because it's a lot shorter here. So here we say l.com, and we want to find a dynamic way, and we sort of want to see wherever the position in the string where the @ sign is, we want to start from there. So we could do, for example, we say the char index over here. This is just to test it. We can search for, we want to find the @ sign over here in the email column like this. So if we run this query now, we see that, okay, the @ sign is, okay, let's just change this to 4 like this. Then I would need to change this one to 6. If I use this one now, see that, okay, we have now found the @ sign at position 14. But then this string over here, it was found at the 10th. So we have 4 here for Mike, and the dot here, 5, and then Mike again, and so then 10. So the index position of the @ sign is not going to be the same for every value. So we need to come up with a solution for where we can use this dynamically. So if we take the substring, for example, here we specify one started at position 14, but that's only going to work for this row here because this character here happens to be at 14. So we happen to find this character, the @ sign, at index 14, but here it's on the 10. So we could say, we could write another variant. We could say substring. We want to use it on the email, and instead of just typing 14, so where do we want to start from? We want to start from the position where the @ sign is. So we could say, we can have a nested function. We can say char index of the @ sign in the email column like this. And for how much do we want to return? Let's just say 5 for this one, for this example here. And we run this query. Okay, we say 6. Another way we could do is we could use the len of email. So what the len function does is, let me just type it out here. If I type the len of another row here, the len of email. Let me say len. So what this function does is it's going to display, it's going to tell you how many characters, what is the length of the string over here. So we see this string here is of 23 characters, and this string here is of 19 characters. So this is a way how you're going to do that a lot. Oftentimes you are going to nest these functions. So you have, this function, and then you have inside here you have another function to sort of, do some more complicated data transformation. Let's say that we wanted, you see now here we have the @ sign and the gmail.com. We could write another way. We could, since this returns an integer, we could say that instead of starting at the position where we find the @ sign, we could say that we wanted to start at that position plus 1. So what that's going to do is, since this @ sign here is at position 14, we're going to start at 14 plus 1 at 15. So we're going to get everything after that delimiter over there. So if we run this query here, we see that now we only get gmail.com. And just to demonstrate a point here, let's say that now we have gmail.com and we only wanted, you know, Gmail, and that is the correct way to display the data that we want to. We could take this value here and we can use how many functions as well here in the nested one. So we could use the replace function, and from the result we get here, we want to replace the string.com. If we imagine, let's say that every email domain here is .com, we could say we want to replace that with an empty string, and we name that to email domain correct, for example. So if we now run this query, we see that now we only get Gmail, but we have dynamically calculated, we've told T-SQL here to dynamically find the position where we have the @ sign and start from that sign plus 1, so we don't include that @ sign in the string, and then we get everything outside there after that, and we replace the .com with nothing. And so as you can see here, there are very useful to know these functions, because there are a lot of times where you will write queries and you will have some data, some text in some columns that you want to replace with other text, or you simply want to delete it. You need to extract a specific piece of text in a larger string, for example, and then you have to use these functions. So it's very important to know these functions to manipulate strings and work with text. So in the next lecture, we're going to talk about numeric data types and do some basic mathematical operations. So I will see you guys in the next lecture.